There are moments in history that leave us speechless, fleeting seconds that stir the soul and challenge our understanding of reality. On November 7th, 1999, inside the sacred walls of Lourdes, France, one such moment was captured on live television. A simple mass, a priest at the altar, a congregation in prayer. Nothing out of the ordinary, until something extraordinary appeared to happen. As the priest held the consecrated hosts, symbols of Christ's body, a strange movement caught the eye. One of the hosts seemed to rise, unaided. No wires, no wind, no trick of lighting, just silence and the awe of those watching. The Church has never made an official statement on the event. But for the faithful and the curious, this moment continues to raise powerful questions about the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and how heaven sometimes allows itself to be glimpsed, if only for a moment. What you're about to see has been debated for over 2 decades. I will first show you the longer moment, and after zoom into the moment where it's all about. Watch closely.
Toi qui es vraiment saint, toi qui es la source de toute sainteté, nous voici rassemblés devant toi et dans la communion de toute l'Église. En ce premier jour de la semaine, nous célébrons le jour où le Christ est ressuscité d'entre les morts. Par lui que tu as élevé à ta droite, Dieu notre Père, nous te prions. Sanctifie ces offrandes en répandant sur elles ton esprit, qu'elles deviennent pour nous le corps et le sang de Jésus, le Christ, notre Seigneur. Et le donna à ses disciples en disant: Prenez et mangez-en tous. Ceci est mon corps livré pour vous. Si mémoire de la mort et de la résurrection de ton Fils, nous t'offrons, Seigneur, le pain de la vie et la coupe du salut, et nous te rendons grâce, car tu nous as choisis pour servir en ta présence.
Qui se sont endormis dans l'espérance de la résurrection, et de tous les hommes qui ont quitté cette vie, reçois-les dans ta lumière auprès de toi. Sur nous tous, enfin, nous implorons ta bonté. Permets qu'avec la Vierge Marie, la bienheureuse Mère de Dieu, avec les apôtres, Sainte Bernadette Soubirous, et les saints de tous les temps qui ont vécu dans ton amitié, nous ayons part à la vie éternelle et que nous chantions ta louange par Jésus-Christ, ton Fils bien-aimé.
At first glance, the footage seems undeniable. A host lifts on its own, defying gravity, defying logic. For many, it became visual proof of Christ's real presence in the Eucharist. But as with all things extraordinary, we must approach it with both reverence and reason. So, let's ask, what could have happened? Some experts have proposed a simple, yet fascinating explanation: physics. In many Catholic masses, especially large ones like those at Lourdes, oversized hosts are used. These hosts are often handmade and can be slightly warped or bowed due to humidity, heat, or the way they're stored. If one host is concave, bent slightly inward, and another convex, bent slightly outward, and they're stacked together, a small change in air pressure, a tremble in the priest's hand, or even a breath could cause one to pop upward for a brief moment before settling again. On camera, this sudden motion might look like levitation, And if it happened during a moment of silence, surrounded by sacred music and incense, it could feel almost supernatural. But here's the deeper question. Does a natural explanation take away the mystery? Not necessarily. Because in Catholic theology, the miracle of the Eucharist doesn't rely on signs. Every validly consecrated host becomes, by faith, the body of Christ, whether it moves or not. And sometimes, God allows even natural events to awaken the supernatural within us. Still, others believe this wasn't natural at all. They point to the timing, they point to the location, and they point to the stillness of the moment, not as proof of coincidence, but as a sign of something far greater. Because this didn't happen just anywhere. It happened in Lourdes. Lourdes, a name that echoes through Catholic history, a place soaked in prayer, in suffering, in miracles. A place where the Virgin Mary appeared to a simple girl named Bernadette in 1858, where springs of healing water burst from the earth, where millions of pilgrims have come seeking hope, healing, and a touch of the divine. This is no ordinary sanctuary. Lourdes is one of the holiest places on earth, a bridge between heaven and earth. And so when something unusual happens here, people take notice. Or at least, they usually do. Which is why this moment captured in a quiet mass on November 7th, 1999 feels so strange. Not just because of what was seen, but because of what wasn't. Because despite all the attention this video has received in the years since, despite the thousands of shares, the debates, the questions raised by the faithful, and even the curiosity of some theologians, the Catholic Church has never made a single official comment about it. No investigation was launched. No bishop issued a statement. No Vatican department reviewed the footage or asked questions. No declaration was made. Nothing. The sanctuary of Lourdes, so often the site of carefully documented miracles, remained silent. And that silence is telling. Because if a consecrated host truly levitated during the liturgy on live television, in front of cameras, priests, and a basilica full of people, you'd expect a reaction. You'd expect it to be headline news across Catholic media. You'd expect the Church to examine it, to investigate it, to offer some kind of explanation. But none of that happened. Even more puzzling, no one in the Church at that very moment reacted either. No gasps, no movement, no whispers or stunned glances. The priest didn't pause. The altar servers didn't look surprised. The faithful didn't shift in their pews. It was as if no one saw anything at all. No one inside the basilica seemed to notice. And according to reports, no one watching the live broadcast at the time reported anything unusual either. It was only years later, when the clip resurfaced online long after the Mass had ended, long after the candles had burned out, that people began to look closely, to replay the footage, to ask, did something miraculous happen that day? And even now, more than 2 decades later, we still don't have an answer. Only a question, and a silence that speaks louder than words. The priest at the altar never paused. The altar servers remained still. The congregation didn't gasp, kneel, or even turn their heads. There were no cries of awe, no visible signs that anyone present noticed anything unusual. So how do we explain this? One possibility is that nothing truly miraculous happened in that moment, at least not in a way people could see or feel at the time. The apparent movement of the host may have gone completely unnoticed, blending in with the natural flow of the liturgy. It was only later, through the lens of a camera, that the moment gained significance. But perhaps there's another way to see this. Another possibility, quieter, subtler, and more spiritual. What if this moment wasn't meant to shock us? What if it wasn't a dramatic sign, like fire from heaven or voices from the clouds? What if it was something much smaller, something almost imperceptible, a whisper, not a shout, a reminder, not a revelation. Maybe that's exactly why no one in the basilica reacted. Maybe it was never meant for those who were there in the flesh, but for those watching later in silence with open hearts. Perhaps this wasn't a miracle in the way we tend to think of miracles. Not something to prove a point, not something to create a sensation, but a quiet invitation to return to wonder. Because so often, we grow used to the extraordinary. We kneel before the Eucharist. We say the prayers. We receive communion. And yet, sometimes our hearts forget the truth, that we are standing before God Himself. Could it be that this small, almost unnoticed movement of the host was allowed just once to awaken that truth in us again? Not to convince skeptics, not to stir headlines, but to nudge the soul, to call the faithful back to awe, because the greatest danger is not disbelief, it's forgetfulness, forgetting the sacred, forgetting the presence, forgetting that the Lord of heaven and earth humbles Himself to come to us in a piece of consecrated bread. And so perhaps this moment seen only through a camera, noticed only after the fact, wasn't meant to change the world. It was meant to gently stir the heart, to remind us that even in silence, God speaks, that even in stillness, He moves. And in the absence of answers, we are left with what the Church has always called us to approach such mysteries, not with obsession or sensationalism, but with discernment, with humility, and above all with faith. Not faith in signs, not faith in videos, not even faith in miracles, but faith in Christ Himself, who remains with us in the Eucharist, whether the host moves or not. Because the truth was never in the motion. It was in the presence, and that presence never left. So if the Church never investigated it, if no one in the Church reacted, if it could be explained by something as ordinary as warped altar bread and air pressure, why does this moment still linger in our minds? Why has this short clip, just a few seconds long, been watched and shared thousands of times by believers around the world? The truth is, we live in a world that's starved for the sacred. We long to see something, anything that reminds us God is still near. We yearn for signs, for wonders, for something to break through the noise and remind us that heaven hasn't gone silent. And maybe, just maybe, that's why this moment still stirs hearts. Not because we can prove it was a miracle, but because it speaks to a deeper hunger in the soul. There's something about that simple scene, a priest raising the Eucharist, the quiet air of reverence, the sudden motion of the host lifting and settling again, that feels like a whisper from beyond. A subtle reminder that the divine doesn't always roar. Sometimes it barely moves, and still it speaks. The Church has wisely chosen not to declare this event a miracle. And in truth, that silence might be more powerful than a declaration, because Christianity has never depended on visible signs to sustain belief. In fact, the most miraculous thing in the Catholic Church happens every single day in total stillness at altars all over the world, without cameras or applause. Every time a priest speaks the words of consecration, heaven touches earth. Bread becomes the body, wine becomes the blood, and God becomes present, not in the form of lightning or fire, but in the quiet humility of a small, round host. That's the true miracle. The Eucharist doesn't need to float to be real. It doesn't need to glow, bleed, or defy gravity to be the living Christ. But moments like the one we saw from Lourdes in 1999, whether miraculous or not, can serve as wake-up calls. They remind us that we often take the sacred for granted, that we can sit in the presence of God Himself and feel nothing, that heaven can dwell on our altars, and we scroll past it, distracted. Maybe this wasn't a supernatural event at all, or maybe it was a small divine wink, allowed just once, seen only by those who would notice years later. Either way, The message is clear. God is here, in the Eucharist, always. And maybe this video, circulating decades later, is heaven's quiet invitation to return, to kneel again, to approach the altar not with routine, but with reverence. Because the greatest miracle isn't that the host may have floated once. It's that the Lord of the universe comes to us body, blood, soul, and divinity every time we celebrate the Mass. And he waits. In the end, whether or not that host truly rose in the air is not the most important question. What matters most is the reality that Catholics have believed for over 2,000 years, that Jesus Christ is truly present in the Eucharist, not symbolically, not metaphorically, but fully. Body, blood, soul, and divinity. This is the mystery at the heart of our faith. This is the miracle offered to us every single day, not for cameras, not for spectacle, but for you. And so, whether you saw something unexplainable in that 1999 video, or whether you see nothing at all, keep your faith alive. Because faith is not about seeing. It's about trusting. It's about kneeling, even when the host doesn't move, and believing, even when the world says it's just bread. The Eucharist is the beating heart of the Church. It's the place where heaven meets earth. And through it, Christ offers himself to you again and again out of love. So return to him. Visit him in the tabernacle. Adore him in silence. Receive him in the Mass with reverence and awe. Because one day, all the signs and wonders of this world will fade. But Christ's presence in the Eucharist will never fade. It is the quiet miracle that sustains the Church, heals the broken, and strengthens the faithful. And he is still here, waiting for you.